At my niece's birthday party, I said. Can't wait for the big family dinner tomorrow. My uncle laughed. Wait, you don't know? That was yesterday. My grandmother pulled out her phone. Photos, toasts, everyone smiling. My cousin snapped. Maybe take the hint next time. I didn't respond, but what I did next wiped the smiles off every one of their faces. I, 32M, should have seen the signs earlier, but sometimes you're so deep in denial that even the most obvious red flags look like friendly waves. The birthday party was supposed to be simple. My 7-year-old niece deserved a celebration, and despite everything that had been brewing in our family for months, I wasn't going to miss it. I brought the biggest gift box I could find, filled with art supplies she'd been wanting, and arrived fashionably on time with a genuine smile. The atmosphere felt different the moment I walked in. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when I appeared. My sister gave me a quick, almost guilty hug before hurrying back to the kitchen. The adults clustered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones that died whenever I approached. Even the kids seemed to sense something was off, playing quieter than usual. I chalked it up to typical family weirdness. We'd always been a complicated bunch, with old grudges and petty jealousies simmering just below the surface. But this felt different, more pointed, more deliberate. My niece's face lit up when she saw my gift, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. She hugged my legs tight and asked if I'd help her with a new drawing later. I promised I would, not knowing it would be the last normal moment I'd have with my family for a very long time. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself making conversation with my uncle, a man who'd always prided himself on being the family's unofficial social coordinator. He was telling me about some work drama when I mentioned how excited I was for tomorrow's big family dinner. The words left my mouth casually, the way you might comment on the weather. We'd been planning this dinner for weeks. My grandmother's birthday was coming up, and we'd all agreed to celebrate together at my aunt's house. I'd already bought wine, planned my schedule around it, even taken Monday off work to help with cleanup. My uncle's reaction was immediate and telling. He laughed, not the warm chuckle of someone sharing a joke, but the sharp, uncomfortable sound people make when they've been caught in something they'd rather not discuss. He asked if I really didn't know, his voice carrying a mixture of amusement and something that felt uncomfortably close to pity. The blood in my veins seemed to slow as I asked him what he meant. That's when he delivered the blow with casual cruelty, telling me the dinner had happened yesterday. Everyone was there, he said, as if commenting on the weather. Had a great time too. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what I'd just heard. Yesterday was Saturday. I'd spent Saturday doing laundry, grocery shopping, and catching up on work emails. Normal weekend stuff. While I was being productively boring, my entire extended family had gathered for what was supposed to be our celebration, and nobody had thought to tell me. Before I could formulate a response, my grandmother appeared beside us, her phone already in her hands as if she'd been waiting for this moment. She started scrolling through photos with the enthusiasm of someone showing off vacation pictures. There was my aunt's dining room, decorated exactly as we'd discussed. There was my father, raising a toast with the good wine glasses. There was my mother, laughing at something my cousin had said. There were my siblings, my cousins, my uncles, aunts, and even some family friends I'd expected to see tomorrow. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. My grandmother flipped through the photos with a running commentary about how wonderful everything had been. The food was delicious, she said. The conversation was so much better than usual. Everyone seemed so relaxed and happy. She showed me pictures of the cake, the decorations, even a group photo where my absence was glaringly obvious in the arrangement of chairs. I asked her quietly why nobody had told me about the change, though I was beginning to suspect I knew the answer. She gave me a vague response about how things just came together naturally, how sometimes these spontaneous gatherings work out better than planned ones. That's when my cousin approached our little group, clearly having overheard enough to understand what was happening. Unlike my uncle's uncomfortable laughter or my grandmother's feigned innocence, there was nothing subtle about her approach. She told me bluntly that maybe I should take the hint next time, her voice carrying years of accumulated frustration and resentment. The hint. As if my exclusion from a family gathering that had been planned for weeks was some kind of gentle suggestion rather than a deliberate act of cruelty. I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to demand explanations, to ask what I'd done to deserve this treatment. Another part wanted to make a scene, to call out their behavior in front of everyone, including the children. But a larger part of me was already calculating, already planning what came next. I've always been the family's fixer. When my brother needed money for his business venture, I co-signed his loan. When my sister went through her messy divorce, I let her and the kids stay in my guest room for 6 months. When my parents needed help with their mortgage after Dad's heart attack, I quietly covered 3 months of payments without expecting repayment. I'd been the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who showed up when others needed help. Apparently, being reliable and helpful didn't buy you a seat at the family table when they decided you were no longer wanted. I stayed for the rest of the party, playing my part perfectly. I helped serve cake, cleaned up spills, and made appropriate small talk with the few relatives who still seemed comfortable acknowledging my existence. I watched my family carefully, noting who avoided eye contact, who seemed guilty, and who appeared genuinely surprised by what had happened. The categories were illuminating. My parents looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. My siblings were clearly in on it, but couldn't quite meet my eyes. My aunts and uncles seemed split between guilt and defensive justification. Only a few cousins appeared genuinely shocked when they realized what had happened. As I drove home that evening, I began making mental notes, not just about who had participated in my exclusion, but about all the ways I'd been supporting various family members over the years. The loans, both formal and informal. The favors. The emergency help. The times I'd rearranged my life to accommodate their needs. The next few days were enlightening in ways I hadn't expected. I started paying attention to family dynamics I'd previously overlooked. Text messages that didn't include me. Social media posts about gatherings I wasn't invited to. Comments and inside jokes that suddenly made sense in this new context. My exclusion wasn't spontaneous. It had been building for months, maybe longer. I'd been gradually edged out of the inner circle, and I'd been too busy being helpful to notice. Update 1. The realization that my family had been systematically excluding me was both crushing and liberating. Crushing because it meant people I'd loved and supported had deliberately chosen to hurt me. Liberating because it meant I was free to stop caring about their feelings. I spent the following week making some important phone calls and sending some carefully worded emails. Nothing dramatic, nothing accusatory. Just practical conversations about practical matters. My brother's business loan, the one I'd co-signed 2 years ago, had been consistently late on payments. I'd been quietly covering the difference to protect both our credit scores, but I called the bank and removed myself as co-signer. I also informed my brother that I'd no longer be covering his shortfalls, and that he had 30 days to refinance or find another co-signer. My sister had been using my Amazon Prime account, my Netflix subscription, and my Costco membership for the past 3 years. I changed all the passwords and removed her access. When she called to complain that her shows weren't working, I explained that I was scaling back my subscriptions to save money. I also called my parents' mortgage company to remove my name from the automatic payment system I'd set up during my father's recovery. They'd never asked me to stop, and I'd never offered, but circumstances had changed. The most satisfying call was to my uncle, the family social coordinator. He'd been using my lake house for family gatherings twice a year for the past 5 years, always promising to cover utilities and maintenance costs, never actually following through. I informed him that I decided to start renting the property commercially, and that the family would need to make other arrangements for future gatherings. Each conversation was civil, professional, and completely reasonable. I wasn't being vindictive or emotional. I was simply adjusting my financial and personal commitments to reflect my current family status. The reactions were swift and predictable. My brother called first, panicking about the loan situation. He'd assumed I'd keep covering for him indefinitely, and had made financial plans based on that assumption. When he started demanding explanations, I calmly reminded him about the family dinner I'd missed and suggested that maybe he should have thought about maintaining better relationships before assuming ongoing financial support. My sister was next, furious about losing access to streaming services and wholesale shopping. She accused me of being petty and childish, throwing a tantrum over one missed dinner. I asked her if she'd known about the dinner change beforehand. Her silence was answer enough. My parents' call was more complicated. They were hurt and confused, claiming they hadn't realized I was excluded intentionally, that they'd thought it was just a miscommunication. When I asked why nobody had called to check on me when I didn't show up to a dinner I'd been excited about for weeks, they had no good answer. But the real fireworks started when my uncle realized his summer lake house access was gone. Update 2. My uncle's reaction was everything I'd hoped for and more. Within hours of our conversation, my phone started ringing with calls from various family members, all asking what was wrong with me, why I was being so unreasonable, and whether I'd completely lost my mind. The beautiful thing about their outrage was how it perfectly illustrated the problem. Not one person called to apologize for excluding me or to acknowledge that their behavior had been hurtful. Instead, they were furious that their actions had consequences. My cousin, the one who'd told me to take the hint, was particularly incensed. She called me selfish and vindictive, accusing me of punishing innocent family members for one person's comment. I asked her which family members she considered innocent, given that they'd all participated in a dinner I'd been deliberately excluded from. She hung up on me. The social media fallout was almost comical. Suddenly, family members who hadn't posted about me in months were sharing old photos and memories, talking about how much they missed me and hoped we could work things out. The comment sections were filled with concerned relatives asking what had happened, creating exactly the kind of public attention my family usually avoided. My grandmother, the photo showing Queen herself, made a particularly interesting post about the importance of family forgiveness and understanding. The irony was apparently lost on her, but not on several family friends who commented with confused questions about what needed forgiving. But the real entertainment came when summer vacation season arrived, and my uncle realized I wasn't kidding about the lake house. Every Memorial Day for 5 years, he'd organized a family weekend at my property. Everyone would drive up Friday, stay through Sunday, eat my food, drink my beer, use my boats, and leave me with cleanup duty and a massive utility bill. This year, when he called the usual family tree to organize the trip, I informed everyone that the house was booked with paying guests. The explosion was magnificent. Suddenly, I was getting calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, all wanting to know why I was being so hostile to the family. My aunt offered to pay rental fees, as if the issue was money rather than respect. My mother suggested we could all talk things through if I'd just be reasonable about the lake house access. I remained pleasant and unmovable. I explained to each caller that I'd reassessed my family relationships and decided to treat everyone with exactly the same level of consideration they'd shown me. If they wanted to rebuild our relationship, I was open to that conversation, but it would start with acknowledgement and apologies, not with demands for continued access to my resources. Most of the calls ended with angry accusations about my attitude and character. A few relatives actually listened and asked what they could do to make things right. The difference in reactions told me everything I needed to know about who was worth rebuilding relationships with. Update 3. 6 months after the birthday party incident, my family dynamics had completely transformed, and not in the ways anyone had expected. The relatives who'd been angriest about losing access to my resources had largely stopped speaking to me entirely, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. My uncle's social coordination efforts collapsed without the lake house as a central gathering point, and several other family members had to step up and actually contribute to family events for the first time in years. But the most interesting development was how the family power structure had shifted. Without me as the reliable backup plan, several family members discovered that their financial situations were more precarious than they'd realized. My brother ended up having to sell his house and downsize significantly when he couldn't find another cosigner or manage his loan payments independently. My sister had to get a second job to afford the streaming services and bulk shopping she'd taken for granted. More importantly, other family members started questioning the dynamics that had led to my exclusion. My youngest cousin, who'd been genuinely shocked at the birthday party, began asking pointed questions about who had decided to exclude me and why. When she couldn't get straight answers, she started declining family invitations and making her own plans. 2 of my aunts, who'd been uncomfortable with the situation but had gone along with it, began reaching out to me privately to apologize and try to rebuild our individual relationships. Even some of the children were asking questions. My niece, the birthday girl, had noticed my absence from family gatherings and kept asking when I was coming to visit. When adults gave her vague answers, she started asking more specific questions about why families sometimes stop talking to each other. The real turning point came at Thanksgiving. My grandmother, the family matriarch, had always hosted our traditional Thanksgiving dinner. But this year, she found herself in an interesting position. Several key family members were either not speaking to each other or were demanding apologies before they'd attend the same gathering. The guest list that had once automatically included 30 people was suddenly complicated by a web of grievances and hurt feelings. When she called to invite me, I was polite but clear about my conditions. I'd be happy to attend if the people who'd orchestrated my exclusion were prepared to acknowledge their behavior and make genuine apologies. Otherwise, I made other plans and was quite content with them. She tried to convince me to be the bigger person, to let bygones be bygones for the sake of family unity. I reminded her that I'd been the bigger person for years, always accommodating, always helping, always forgiving. Being the bigger person had gotten me deliberately excluded from family events while people laughed about it. The conversation ended with her promising to think about what I'd said. 2 days before Thanksgiving, my phone rang with a group call that included my parents, my grandmother, and my uncle. They'd clearly rehearsed what they wanted to say, but it came out as a mixture of half apologies and justifications that somehow managed to make their original behavior sound even worse. My uncle admitted that they'd changed the dinner date without telling me, but claimed it was because they'd been frustrated with my tendency to dominate family conversations. My grandmother acknowledged that excluding me had been hurtful, but suggested that maybe I'd been too sensitive about the whole thing. My parents apologized for not speaking up, but also implied that I'd been overreacting to what was essentially a misunderstanding. I listened to their prepared statements and then asked a simple question. If they had problems with my behavior at family gatherings, why had nobody ever spoken to me directly about those concerns? The silence that followed was telling. I thanked them for calling and confirmed that I'd made other plans for Thanksgiving. I also mentioned that I'd be happy to discuss rebuilding our relationships once they were ready to take full responsibility for their actions without justifications or conditions. My alternative Thanksgiving plans, as it turned out, were infinitely better than anything my family could have offered. I'd connected with my youngest cousin, the one who'd been asking uncomfortable questions, and several family friends who'd been caught in the middle of our drama. We organized a Friendsgiving dinner that ended up including people from multiple friend groups and a few relatives who'd grown tired of the family politics. The evening was everything our traditional family gatherings had never been. Relaxed, genuinely fun, and free of the undercurrents of resentment and obligation that had always poisoned family events. People came because they wanted to be there, not because they felt obligated. Conversations were genuine rather than performative. And when someone needed to leave early or couldn't contribute something they'd promised, nobody held grudges or made passive-aggressive comments. As I looked around the table at people who'd chosen to spend the holiday with me because they actually enjoyed my company, I realized something profound. I'd been so focused on maintaining relationships with people who didn't respect me that I'd been neglecting relationships with people who actually valued me. Update 4, Final. A full year has passed since my niece's birthday party changed everything, and I'm writing this final update from my lake house, where I'm hosting a weekend gathering for the people who've become my chosen family. The biological family situation has largely resolved itself, though not in the way anyone expected. About half of my relatives have made genuine efforts to rebuild our relationships. These conversations started with real apologies, not the half-hearted justifications I'd received before, and they've led to healthier dynamics than we'd ever had previously. My youngest cousin and I have grown closer than ever. 2 of my aunts have become regular lunch companions. Even one of my siblings eventually came around, though it took months of honest conversations and genuine changes in how we interact. The other half have essentially written me off as a lost cause, which has been an unexpected gift. The relatives who were angriest about losing access to my resources, who demanded that I apologize for protecting myself, who insisted that family should mean unconditional support regardless of how they treated me. These people have shown me exactly who they always were. I just hadn't been willing to see it before. My brother never did manage to keep his business afloat without my financial backing. Instead of reflecting on the consequences of burning bridges, he's told anyone who will listen that I sabotaged his success out of spite. My uncle still complains bitterly about losing lake house access and has convinced several family members that I'm vindictive and unreasonable. My cousin, the one who told me to take the hint, continues to post passive-aggressive social media content about fake family members and fair-weather relatives. Their reactions have been clarifying rather than hurtful. These are people who valued what I could provide more than who I was as a person. Losing those relationships wasn't a loss, it was a correction. The most surprising development has been how my life has expanded to fill the space those toxic relationships used to occupy. Without the constant drain of managing family drama and providing free emotional and financial labor to people who didn't respect me, I've had energy and resources to invest in relationships that actually enrich my life. I've grown closer to friends I'd previously neglected because I was always available for family emergencies. I've joined clubs and started hobbies I'd put off because weekends were always consumed by family obligations. I've even started dating seriously for the first time in years, no longer worried that potential partners would be driven away by my complicated family dynamics. The lake house that used to host ungrateful family gatherings now sees regular visitors who appreciate the invitation, contribute to expenses, and leave the place cleaner than they found it. My financial situation has stabilized without the constant drain of covering other people's poor planning. My stress levels have dropped dramatically without the ongoing emotional labor of managing other people's feelings while ignoring my own. Most importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts about how people treat me. For years, I'd made excuses for family members' behavior because they were family, as if biological relationships somehow justified emotional abuse. I'd convinced myself that their treatment of me was acceptable because they occasionally needed my help, as if being useful was the same as being valued. The birthday party incident wasn't really about one missed dinner. It was the culmination of years of being taken for granted, treated as a resource rather than a person, and expected to absorb their cruel treatment without complaint. Their shock and anger when I finally established boundaries revealed exactly how they'd always seen me, as someone who existed to serve their needs without expecting basic respect in return. Cutting them off wasn't revenge, despite how it might have looked from the outside. It was self-preservation disguised as consequence management. The relatives who've made genuine efforts to rebuild our relationships understand this distinction. They've acknowledged that excluding me was cruel, that they'd taken my support for granted, and that they want to do better going forward. These relationships are now healthier than they'd ever been before because they're based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. The relatives who remain angry about losing access to my resources have revealed their true priorities. They're not upset about losing me. They're upset about losing what I provided. Their continued hostility toward me for refusing to accept poor treatment tells me everything I need to know about their character and their capacity for genuine change. Sometimes people ask if I regret how I handled things, if I wish I tried harder to repair relationships with the family members who've cut me off. The answer is simple. You can't repair relationships with people who don't see treating you badly as a problem that needs fixing. I gave them multiple opportunities to acknowledge their behavior and make amends. Instead, they doubled down on their justifications and became angry when their actions had consequences. That wasn't my choice. It was theirs. My life is immeasurably better now. I'm surrounded by people who choose to be in my life because they enjoy my company, not because they want something from me. I have energy for my own goals and dreams instead of constantly managing other people's problems. I've learned to value myself enough to walk away from relationships that diminish rather than enhance my life. The little girl whose birthday party started this whole journey is now 8, and she still asks about me sometimes. My sister occasionally sends pictures and updates, part of her ongoing effort to rebuild our relationship. In those photos, I can see that my niece is growing up in a family that's learned some hard lessons about how they treat the people they claim to love. That's probably the best possible outcome from all of this. The next generation is watching and learning, and hopefully they'll do better than we did.